If you like weird existentialist science fiction that explores death, religion, and that warps time in a spectacular fashion, then this collection is for you. Stay tuned. Welcome to Biblicultus, where I review books that I find interesting in the topics of religion, philosophy, history, and fiction. Please remember to subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications, like the video, share the video, and comment on the video. It really helps the channel out. In this episode, I will go over 4 novels of the 1960s by Philip K. Dick. This particular edition comes from a set, so I will go through it eventually. But this one in particular, it's called The 4 Novels of the 1960s. And it was published by Library of America in 2007. Now, it collects 4 particular novels: The Man in the High Castle, The 3 Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, Do Androids Dream of Electronic Sheep, and Ubik. So, all of these 4 novels are really great examples of Dick's work, and I'll just give you a few concepts in each novel so that it entices you to get the collection itself, or at least these 4 novels by themselves. You can find these independently if you wish, but the collection in this particular volume is very good. So The Man in the High Castle is my least favorite of the 4. Don't get me wrong, it is actually a great novel, but there's a lot of these geopolitical elements in the work that are cliche in my particular perspective. Now, I understand that reading it at the time would have been different, because a lot of these concepts and a lot of these critiques of the Axis powers during the war would have sounded pretty reasonable. But to me, they're quite exaggerated, in the sense of having the Axis powers try to actually control the entire planet, which to me is an obviously propagandistic point of view on the Second World War. In other words, each side accused the other of trying to dominate the planet and control the world and conquer the universe. And in this work, they actually attempt to do exactly that. But to me, it's so unbalanced and absurd that it takes away a little bit from the work. But again, this is a very subjective thing, because in fiction, your perception and your historical reality is going to affect how you view literature. So reading it now is different than reading it 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago. So always be aware of that. Now, I do love the fact that even though it has this geopolitical context, this what-if alternative universe conception, the focus of the novel is not on the geopolitics or the American perspective on the Second World War, but it is actually on characters that he develops in the novel that, trade in antiques and are contending with a lot of the cultural dynamics that would be the consequence of the Second World War. A world in which the Axis beat the Allies. I think I can say that without spoiling the work, because this particular novel has been made into TV series, etc. So most people would at least be able to know this, and even if you read the flap on the book, it'll tell you some of this information already. I do like the fact that they focus on the Japanese side of the conflict. I think it's a lot more interesting, and it allows the author to utilize the I Ching, which, if you don't know much about it, I'll put a note right here on it, but it is an ancient method of divination, but also of philosophical introspection that is Chinese, and it's something I actually tried when I was a kid. When I first read about it, I got coins and I got my notebook and I actually played a lot with it. So to me, reading the novel and encountering the I Ching was very cool, because it reminded me of that experience. And if you read the biographical notes at the end of this particular volume, it does tell you that the author utilized the I Ching to actually put together the work itself, so that the Man in the High Castle is structured around divination itself. The divination helped them organize the work. Now, the way he also experiments and considers the possibility of alternative universes being joined together in a way, because that's really the main crux of the work, to make you question whether or not alternative realities are possibly conjoined with this one. Or in the case of the work, if that one is an alternative universe. And using the I Ching to kind of merge them together is an absolutely genius idea. So like I said, it's my least favorite, but it's still a great novel. Even though I criticize the geopolitical presentation of the work, the context of the work, he does do a lot of wonderfully clever reflections on the Germans and the Japanese during the Second World War. So first he argues that the Germans have a cosmic view. It is almost inhuman because their focus is, for example, on honor and concepts like the blood, etc., which he views as being detached from practical humanity, and basically making the case that it's Nietzschean to an extreme, and therefore this is why it is somehow inhumane, because it's too focused on concepts and not really on humanity. And this idea of being connected to nature, and nature being God, but therefore you being a participant of God, he's making a case that the German mindset during the war, in other words, the philosophical underpinning of the German side, was theologically more akin to pantheism, and therefore it put human beings as not only participants of creation, but as creators themselves, as gods on earth. And this is a very interesting critique. I've read it before. Many thinkers at the time were also saying something like this. As a matter of fact, Jung himself makes this case when it comes to the collective unconscious and the archetype that is being resurrected during that period of time in Germany. So I think there's obviously a clear connection here between these concepts. Now, there is a part in that reflection that I want to quote because I think it gives you a very interesting perspective on how he sees things.
What they do not comprehend is man's helplessness. I am weak, small, of no consequence to the universe. It does not notice me. I live on unseen. But why is that bad? Isn't it better that way? Whom the gods notice, they destroy. Be small, and you will escape the jealousy of the great.
So see there, again, very similar to a Lovecraftian conception of cosmic insignificance. And it is basically accusing the Germans of not being humble enough about their own self-existence, which is actually a critique of both the Catholics and the Orthodox, and of the traditional school that was clearly directed at the Third Reich and the German cultural phenomena that led to the Second World War. So I think that the author here is very precise and I think has a good criticism of the era. So in spite of the geopolitical cliches involved in the work, I think at the bottom of it, the analysis is actually very good. The work, because it does focus more on the Japanese side of things, I think the most profound aspect of the work is the reflection on the Japanese soul when it comes to the artistic sensibility that they tend to manifest. The unseen, the subtle, the beauty in the silence, or the ethereal and the mundane. And this is developed throughout the work, and I think it is masterful. Now, the second novel is The Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch. This is a spectacular novel, and it explores how evolution will be monetized and sold, and how it will influence the consciousness of people. And what does it really mean to evolve or devolve while simultaneously trying to exist in a dreadful and disturbed world? It also contends with mind-altering drugs and how these are used in the modern world, but he's addressing it in a futuristic kind of scenario to somehow escape the existentially meaningless feeling that human beings feel when they're devoid of a spiritual concept. But of course, drugs are used in his alternative universe as a replacement of religion, even though it contains religious motifs. But he even compares what we would call normative religion with this religion of drug usage and how it can be seen as an alternative to religion. Now he brings up transubstantiation and the Platonic concepts of substance versus accidents. And again, very intelligent discussion on this and reflection on it, and a very creative application of it as well. I've actually reviewed recent books that also kind of contend with transubstantiation and a lot of these Catholic themes and trying to apply them to fiction. But I do think that this author is quite masterful in playing with that idea. But this entire novel will make you question reality itself. Where is that line between the real and the surreal? And how dangerous it can be to lose yourself in a soup of mind-altering substances. So to a person like myself who has always despised all drug culture and everything related to it, I think this is the closest I will ever get to taking a mind-altering drug and experiencing a sense of confusion, but also of enlightenment. And I think it is a very interesting approach to the topic. Now, Do Androids Dream of Electronic Sheep would be the third novel in the collection. Now, this work is famous because it inspired the movie Blade Runner, and it was actually begun as a project during the lifetime of Philip K. Dick. While I was reading this novel, I could identify some similarities, but it was very distant in the background of my mind because I saw the movie when I was a kid and I was not necessarily a big fan of it, so I haven't watched it more than once in my entire life. So some of the concepts and ideas were there, but I didn't identify it in this novel until much later. Now here the author is exploring ontology itself, what it means to be an actual human being, what it means to be, and the distinction between artificial life and organic life, and the important aspect of how human beings relate to each other and to nature and to the world. Now, he has an idea in that novel about merging, which is a form of collective consciousness machine. And I think that was a very clever way of exploring this psychological concept. Now, the novel itself states that it is empathy that distinguishes human beings from other creatures, including even certain animals, because the example that he gives when he is discussing this notion involves other living organic creatures. So it's not only androids, but he compares androids to certain organic life. So he's already blurring that line between organic life and artificial life, which I think in the modern age with AI and these things is a very important analysis. But what does it mean to be empathetic? And to who do you apply this empathy? Does it have distinctions? Does it have lines? Also, are we part of the process of entropy itself? Are we, as creatures, the crux of a process of destruction? Are we needed in the universe as part of the development and also the destruction of existence? And I'm also going to quote from this particular novel because I think it will also give you a perspective.
The old man said, "You will be required to do wrong no matter where you go. It is the basic condition of life to be required to violate your own identity. At some time, every creature which lives must do so. It is the ultimate shadow, the defeat of creation. This is the curse at work, the curse that feeds on all life, everywhere in the universe."
To me, that sounds a lot like the traditional perspective on the fall of Adam. the fall of man, because it contends with the nature of identity and the nature of decay, how the self is a participant of destruction, and obviously redemptive conceptions of existence are not present per se in the work, meaning there's no salvific character that necessarily comes to somehow ameliorate this issue. But there is still an exploration in this novel of what could it mean to be saved from this condition, if it's possible at all. And the last novel in the collection would be Ubik. Now this one was my favorite of the four novels because of how it explores death and the afterlife. Time warping in this particular novel is highly developed and prevalent, and the very conception of what it means to be alive, to be conscious, is to me one of the quintessential questions of theology. And this work explores it in a very interesting fashion. Is it really easy to tell the difference between being dead or alive? If consciousness continues, then the distinction between a dream and a waking state, or being alive or dead, should be quite difficult to manage. In his novel, it would be the half-life state or the life state. Now, the author mentions the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and I think it is a significant work to bring up in a novel, and I think it gives you plenty of hints behind the deeper meaning of the work. Although authors can inject any kind of information to the work to make it more interesting, like the I Ching, for example, in The Man in the High Castle, which it is actually not only relevant to the story because it carries it, although it seems to be a insignificant detail or particularity of that universe, until you realize that it is actually the core of the work, not only within the universe of the novel, but actually how the author structured the novel. And here, I think it's a similar situation, especially when it contends with the lights that a person sees when they die. And you'll understand more about it when you read it yourself. There's also a sense of Christian Manichaeism, of dualism, that you'll encounter it as you go through the work, and I would say probably closer to the end. There is this clear conflict between two forces that are trying to somehow make sense of existence, and you have a side that is pulling you towards destruction and towards decay and disarticulation. Then there's another one that's trying to construct and create a sense of being and of existence. And that to me is a clear theological perspective. And are we here in a universe of our own self-creation, or are we in the creation of another being? And the theological position is that we are in the matrix of God, or the gods, depending on your perspective. If you're in the ancient world and you're a pagan, if you're a polytheist in the ancient world, then this is how you're going to see it. But it still means that you're part of a context and that you are somewhat out of control. Whereas in the more solipsistic point of view of the postmodernism that we have to contend with as the religion of modernity, it is all really your creation. Both of these ideas are contrasting, and a traditionalist could argue that one is the position of God, the other is the position of the devil. Either way, you find this in the novel in a very interesting presentation. And I think just for that, the novel is very important to read and reflect on, because I think it will help you connect to things like Platonism and this notion of the forms. So in general, this is a great collection of works, and I think a good introduction to Philip K. Dick if you've never read any of his works. I will eventually go through the entire box set, but when I go through a book that has 3 novels of one single author, I tend to take a break from the author to digest their works and not be overloaded with the same thought pattern. So I will eventually get to the second volume and the third, etc. And once I do, I will review them here. So hopefully you enjoyed the review. Keep in mind, these are just my perspectives and I don't give a lot of details because I'm trying to encourage you to read them and I don't want to spoil any of the work. And if you have your own opinions about works, or if you think that there are other things that should be mentioned, then put them in the comments and people can take advantage of that, of your own thoughts and your own comments on any of these novels. So please remember to subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications, like the video, share the video, and comment on the video. It really helps the channel out. Thank you for being with me. See you next time.